Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're taking a deep dive not just into a book, but really into a mind. We're exploring Réflexions d'un pipo by Albert Hilaire Anobon Momo.
And this isn't just a book, it's a compilation of over a decade of his thinking, short editorials, deeper reflections on, well, all sorts of things. Science, society, politics, philosophy.
Plus book reviews and personal notes, too.
Exactly. It's a unique stack of sources curated by the author himself.
Right, the author of pipo, that means someone from the Polytechnic School, he believes these pieces are still highly relevant today.
Hmm.
So our mission really is to go through this material, pull out the most important nuggets, and give you a shortcut to understanding his perspective and why these ideas might still resonate with you.
Think of it as getting a guided tour through the ideas and issues he found important enough to write about over many years, and, often shaped by discussions within his community,
Yeah.
like the Peapoid Forum he mentions.
So to start, the book structures these thoughts into four main parts: editorials, reflections, book reviews, and notes d'humeur.
Which sounds a bit like mood notes or personal sketches.
Yeah, kind of.
And that structure tells you something, doesn't it? The editorials were often timely interventions, maybe setting a tone or reacting to debates happening then.
Right. And the reflections were where he could spend more time really wrestling with a complex idea.
While the book reviews show you the direct inputs, the things he was reading that either influenced him or maybe challenged his thinking.
It's like seeing some of the raw material his thinking was built on. Interesting.
Let's jump into some of the reflections centered around Africa.
Yeah.
A powerful theme right up front is the call for African intellectuals to step up.
Yes, in the editorial Penser, which means to think, from February 2010.
He directly echoes Maurice Kamto's idea in L'Agence de la Pensée, the urgency of thought. It's a strong call.
He's calling for elites to get out of their ivory towers, right? It's not just about doing things.
No, it's about thinking deeply about the continent's problems.
So, action is needed, obviously.
Of course. But the author feels the most striking deficit, particularly in Africa, is the lack of deep, sustained, applied thought directed towards solving its challenges. It's a challenge laid bare.
Then there's the reflection titled Eclipses. This one really resonated with me. It touches on the tension between traditional culture and modern education.
How so?
He talks about how his scientific studies, reading Science AV, learning physics and geography, felt like they were eclipsing or overshadowing the traditional worldviews he grew up with.
The magic religious views, the local tales.
Exactly. It's a powerful personal insight into a broader societal dynamic, I think.
He's describing how getting a modern, often Western-influenced education can feel like you have to reject parts of your own cultural identity.
Right. And he suggests this internal conflict might contribute to a situation where one feels like they approach the international community. How did he put it?
With the hand that commands, which means the hand that begs.
Oof, it's a stark image. The idea that losing that cultural grounding while acquiring knowledge could lead to, well, a perceived position of asking rather than contributing equally. That's a really interesting takeaway.
Moving into politics and governance, he offers a striking comparison in Compte et de Compte, Counts and Miscounts from 2010. This is about population censuses.
This is where he contrasts the U.S. and India with Cameroon.
Exactly. He sees the U.S. Census as this well-oiled machine, directly tied to services and political representation, driven largely by general interest over political maneuvering.
Okay. And India?
India, he notes, used its census as a modernization goal. They leveraged technology, shifted focus from identity towards socioeconomics, basically using the data to fight poverty effectively.
And then he looks at Cameroon. What does he say there?
Well, he doesn't necessarily critique the methodology itself, but he highlights the unexplained issues. Long delays in results, disparities in figures like the population of Douala or regional growth rates that just don't seem to add up. And here's the critical insight he draws. He asks, is this discrepancy in the fundamental act of counting people and then using that data precisely why Cameroon isn't developing like India or operating like the USA?
So it's not just about counting, but about what that counting enables. He links this to the difference between, well, manufacturing election results through fudge numbers versus developing genuine national strategies based on accurate, reliable data.
It's a fundamental choice, really, about the value placed on truth and planning. Another poignant political piece is the editorial Morts pour rien, Deaths for Nothing, from June 2009.
Right. He uses the metaphor of spring here, doesn't he, to describe popular uprisings demanding liberty and democracy?
Yes, mentioning historical examples like Prague in 68, Beijing in 89, and the democratic movements across Africa in the 90s, including in Cameroon.
He highlights the tragic outcome in places like Beijing and many African nations where these calls for change were met with, well, violent repression.
Leaders either ignored the demands or made only superficial cosmetic changes, often crushing the protests at significant human cost.
And as that particular spring of 2009 seemed to end without real change, the heartbreaking question he's left wrestling with is simple and profound.
Why do they die? Just gut-wrenching.
Okay, but then there's a piece that seems to go in a slightly different direction, something about Libreville.
Yes, this is where it gets really interesting, a political observation that perhaps surprised even him.
Yeah.
In Lecons de Libreville, from March 2011, he went to Gabon, and he was initially quite skeptical about a father-son succession election happening there.
Based on what he calls the typical cliches of African democracy in retreat, he was ready to be unimpressed.
Right. His initial feeling was, let's say, unfavorable. But he spent 4 weeks there, and he writes about having to genuinely revise his position.
What changed his mind?
He was impressed by the visible concrete development efforts he witnessed cranes everywhere, the Gabon Immersion Project visibly underway.
So tangible stuff on the ground.
Exactly. He describes seeing the leader visiting sites, wearing a hard hat and boots, showing apparent enthusiasm, and crucially, diligent follow-up in ministerial meetings.
Where decisions were made and actually acted upon.
Apparently so. This personal experience of seeing tangible results and apparent dedication genuinely changed his perspective, at least on the development front.
Despite his initial political reservations about the election process itself.
Right. It highlights how observation can challenge preconceptions, you know.
Football shows up too, but not just as a sport, it seems.
No, he sees it as a microcosm of broader issues, particularly within Cameroon. He reviews Jean Lambert Nang's book, Desperate Football House.
And his passion for Cameroonian football is clear, but so is his frustration, right, with FECAFOOT, the Football Federation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He calls Nang's book a brûlot. That's a strong term, like a fiery, critical pamphlet exposing the gravediggers of Cameroonian football.
And who are these gravediggers? What does he mean?
He means the corruption and cheating, lying about players' ages, shady transfers, practices that undermine the sport from within. It sounds pretty bad. He reflects on Nang's own brief, difficult time as Director General, trying to clean up the system from the inside.
And how did that go?
The author notes that Nang ultimately paid the price for trying to change that entrenched house from within, losing his position. It's presented as a kind of metaphor for the difficulty of systemic reform anywhere.
The challenges of the post-colonial world, like migration and poverty, are also viewed through the lens of books he read.
Yes, he reviews Excels at Migrations Postcoloniales and notes its importance in discussing the sensitive, often taboo topic of Africans leaving the continent.
And this links to his review of Peter Singer's The Life You Can Save, doesn't it?
It does. Singer makes a provocative argument. Ending extreme poverty requires significant sacrifice, primarily from individuals in rich countries, not just governments.
So the onus is on people, not just institutions.
That's Singer's point. He argues wealthy individuals aren't giving nearly enough in charity and contrasts it with how government aid is often tied to political goals and can be misspent or ineffective.
Does he offer solutions?
Singer provides ways to evaluate charities, acknowledging it's not perfect, but reinforcing the idea that people in rich countries could give substantially more without drastically altering their own lives.
So the core insight here is the moral imperative placed directly on the individual. Interesting.
Let's zoom out a bit to some broader philosophical and social themes he explores. The reflection on tolerance is particularly thought-provoking.
How does he define tolerance?
He defines it basically as suspending judgment when you have an unfavorable opinion about something. But he immediately notes its ambiguity.
That's not straightforward.
No. He traces its history, linking it to ideas like individual autonomy from Kant, secularism, progress, and reason. But here's the key distinction he makes.
Okay.
Tolerance, for him, often applies where there's just opinion or a lack of knowledge. It's about putting up with something you might disagree with because you don't know for sure. He contrasts this with freedom of spirit, which comes from knowledge that genuinely liberates you from needing to tolerate ignorance.
Can you give an example?
He uses Darwin's evolution theory, which is based on scientific evidence and is testable, versus the Bible, which requires belief or tolerance of belief.
Got it.
His powerful closing thought here is, democracy is not weakness. Tolerance is not passivity. It's an active, sometimes difficult stance.
This naturally leads into his thoughts on intolerance, hypocrisy, and hate.
Right. He argues that intolerance often forces people into lying and duplicity just out of fear.
And hate.
Hate, he sees as the final, most destructive effect of intolerance. It clouds reason, makes groups easily manipulated. He uses the word docile and capable of terrible acts, even murder or suicide.
That's dark.
It is. He argues that hate, more than violence itself, should be strictly forbidden. And he offers a cautionary note, too.
Which is?
Judging yourself as being against intolerance can create a sense of moral superiority over those you deem intolerant, which can be its own trap. Anarchy is another complex idea he unpacks. We often think of anarchy as just chaos, right? Societal disorder or a weak state.
What he calls administrative anarchy.
Exactly. He even quotes Charles de Rémusat saying, the goal of politics is liberty without anarchy and order without despotism. That's the conventional view.
But there's another side.
Yes. Then he introduces the counter view from thinkers like Proudhon, who saw anarchy as a potentially rational, positive philosophy, one capable of creating a new social order based on equality.
He mentions Bakunin expounding on this and historical examples like anarchist movements during the Spanish Civil War.
Right. The author himself seems a bit ambivalent about the ideal of neither God nor master.
How so?
While it might represent a certain kind of human hope, he also acknowledges it could potentially lead to despair or a lack of direction if taken to an extreme. It's not a simple endorsement, more an exploration of a radical idea. The ubiquity of violence is something he addresses, prompted by recent events in Cameroon involving malfrats, basically criminals or thugs, protesters, and security forces.
He highlights how difficult it is to even define violence precisely. He lists different types he encounters in his sources.
Yeah, physical, symbolic, structural, but also less commonly discussed ones like cold violence, which is inflicting suffering indirectly, violence against oneself, educational violence.
How children are sometimes treated.
Right. And even speciesist violence against animals. It shows he's thinking broadly about where violence exists.
Does he think it's inevitable?
He grapples with that. Is it inherent in human nature? Is aggressivity an instinct? Or is violence a learned desire to dominate? He brings in Rousseau's view.
What did Rousseau think?
That violence is actually a product of social existence, arising from our interactions and the need for respect, which can lead to outrage and terrible vengeance when violated.
And he notes its deep historical roots, comparing violence portrayed in American culture with Europe's long history of conflict.
Exactly, from ancient empires to bloody revolutions. The point isn't to say one is worse, but that violence is a pervasive historical part of human society everywhere. The connection between religion, war, and peace is another complex knot he tries to untangle.
He presents the argument that religion can be a major factor in conflict, right? Citing historical examples.
Yes, the Ottoman Empire, Lebanon, the Inquisition, the Crusades, conflicts in Northern Ireland, Bosnia. Plenty of examples, sadly.
And he links this to the dogmatic nature of religious discourse.
Right. It's often seen as absolute truth, which makes compromise difficult.
Yeah.
And the focus on promises of an afterlife is sometimes used to justify earthly violence.
But he balances this.
He does. He acknowledges religion's historical role in promoting peace, pointing to the influence of 20th century popes like John Paul II on significant global events.
So what's his conclusion?
His nuanced takeaway is that the real problem isn't necessarily the existence of dogmas themselves, but their interpretation and determinant that's like twisting or misappropriating them for selfish or harmful purposes.
So it's how they're used.
Essentially. Given this constant tension, he concludes that total peace feels almost utopian.
This leads him to discuss Robert Wright's book, The Evolution of God.
Right, which argues that religious texts across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam show an evolution in how God's will is depicted, often influenced by historical circumstances.
And religions that emphasize cooperation gain strength.
That's Wright's point. Like Paul's idea of universal brotherhood or early Islam's emphasis on community, Wright offers a hopeful angle. Maybe the evolution of religious doctrine is actually the slow education of human beings on the real nature of the divine will.
An interesting possibility.
The author finds it compelling. And he also includes Albert Memmi's perspective, too.
Which was?
That for many, religion functions as a convenient fiction and an indispensable crutch, a more skeptical view. He also takes time to clarify concepts that might seem similar but have crucial distinctions: solidarity and charity.
How does he differentiate them? They sound related.
They are, but he sees solidarity as a more recent concept, rooted in things like Roman law. It involves an affective link, a political, social, or fraternal affinity. The key is a commitment to social justice, focused on the future and addressing the systemic issues that cause disadvantage.
Okay, so solidarity is about fixing the system for the future. And charity.
Charity is presented as more traditional, often tied to Christian love or mutual aid. It's typically a discretionary act of generosity.
Meaning it's optional, a personal choice?
Exactly. It doesn't necessarily involve an ongoing obligation or guarantee that the person receiving help will escape dependency. He sees it as often highlighting the inherent difference in scale, the rich giving to the poor, the strong helping the weak.
Whereas solidarity is more about leveling the playing field.
That's something like that, creating a shared future and lifting people out of dependency itself. That's the distinction he draws.
Let's shift gears into his insights on science and technology, which is fitting for a pipo, someone from Polytechnic. He even starts with the fundamental building block, the atom.
Yeah, it's interesting. He notes how the 1694 dictionary defined the atom as indivisible, a definition science has completely overturned.
Right, modern physics shows it's anything but indivisible.
He traces the concept back to ancient Greece, but then quickly brings us to modern particle physics. Then he jumps to the origin of the entire universe, mentioning the Big Bang evidence.
And this is where it gets really abstract, right? The fine-tuning problem?
Exactly. He talks about the question of how our universe became so finely tuned for life, referencing the specific 6 numbers, fundamental physical constants that, if even slightly different, would make life impossible.
Which leads him to
The mind-bending concept of multiple universes, levels I through 4e, as explored by cosmologists like Martin Rees. Level I suggests identical copies of you might exist right now, mind-bogglingly far away,
wow.
simply because the universe is potentially infinite. He finds the idea fascinating, noting these possibilities are supported by tested theories like relativity and quantum mechanics.
So how does he wrap that up?
He ends this reflection by simply asking, why not? Believe in these multiple universes or a perpetual cycle of existence, given the cyclical processes we already observe in nature. It really challenges your conventional understanding of reality. Evolution, genetics, and the fraught concept of race also get serious attention. He highlights Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection as a monumental scientific breakthrough.
Contrasting it with creationism.
Right, providing evidence for how species change over time. But crucially, he addresses the dark side.
How these ideas were twisted into racist theory.
Exactly. Horribly twisted and misapplied. He mentions figures like Gobineau and Lapouge, who use them to claim the existence of superior and inferior human races.
But modern science refutes that completely.
Absolutely. He emphasizes how modern science, particularly genetics, demolishes the idea of rigid human races. He uses the simple example of blood groups A, B, O being found in all human populations.
So the differences are superficial.
Genetically, differences between groups are actually very subtle variations,
Yeah.
mostly related to adapting to different environments, not markers of distinct racial types.
He includes powerful quotes to drive this home.
Yeah, like Saint-Exupéry's, "If you differ, you enrich me," and paleoanthropologist Yves Coppin's perfect response when asked, "Where's your family come from?" "East Africa, like yours."
Underscoring our shared origin.
Precisely. However, he rightly warns that modern genetics also carries the potential danger of leading to new forms of eugenics, a necessary caution. He delves into geographic information systems, or GIS, as a critical modern tool.
GIS, that's basically mapping software and location data technology, right?
Essentially, yes. He explains GIS as powerful systems for managing, analyzing, and visualizing data linked to specific geographic locations. He highlights their exploding importance across countless fields, not just mapping.
But things like marketing, health, transport.
Managing natural resources, you name it. He notes the impact of Moore's Law computing power doubling constantly, plus GPS and the internet, in making GIS so powerful and widespread.
Does he get into the tools?
He does. He focuses on Earth observation satellites, explaining the difference between spatial resolution, how much detail you can see, and precision, how accurately you can pinpoint a location.
And the different types of images.
Yes, he lists them. Panchromatic, black and white high detail, multispectral, using different light wavelengths for vegetation or minerals, stereo for 3D views, radar, which can see through clouds, LiDAR, using lasers for elevation mapping.
And how they're used for everything from agriculture to disaster prevention.
Exactly. It's all about how we're using technology to see and understand the Earth in entirely new ways.
Finally, in this section, he gives us a peek into the future through Michio Kaku's book, Physics of the Future.
Ah, yes, Kaku, the futurist and physicist. He makes predictions for the next 100 years based on existing prototypes and scientific trends.
So it's not just fantasy, it's grounded speculation.
Right, we're talking about things like the internet access through contact lenses,
Wow.
telepathic chips replacing phones, cars that drive themselves, printing human organs, significantly extending life, microscopic molecular bombs targeting cancer cells, truly intelligent robots, and space tourism becoming commonplace.
Sounds like science fiction, but maybe not.
Well, Kaku argues the seeds are already there. But the author notes, Kaku doesn't shy away from the potential downsides either.
Like,
Deadlier future conflicts enabled by technology or accelerating climate change. So, while acknowledging that we'll only know in 100 years how accurate these predictions are.
the author encourages us to think about these possibilities seriously.
Exactly. Not just as entertainment, but as things that might actually shape the future you live in.
The book reviews also offer insight into his perspective on work, education, and identity. His review of Alain de Botton's The Pleasures and Sorrows of Work is a good example.
Right. He appreciates de Botton's unique approach, philosophizing, by being a kind of tourist, observing people in various jobs.
He seems to like de Botton's humor and insight, even if it's sometimes pessimistic.
Yes, especially about the nature of modern work and the potential despair it can cause. He likes de Botton's method of observing people's jobs and then imagining their inner lives.
Creating a kind of speculative fiction about the worker's experience.
Exactly. He uses a specific example from the book. De Botton's description of executives thinking about how to fill their clients' emptiness with combinations of sugar, fat, and flour.
That's a darkly humorous take on marketing.
Very much so. Walter Kern's Lost in the Meritocracy, recounting his experience at Princeton, raises very sharp questions about the purpose of education.
What was Kern's issue?
Kern initially saw getting an elite education as just, accumulating grades and prizes to get ahead, but he became deeply disillusioned.
Why?
He described a culture where success came from denigrating culture, not appreciating it. He makes a strong, provocative accusation that his generation of elite graduates might be cheaters by birth, valuing cunning and gaming the system over genuine wisdom.
That's a powerful critique. It boils down to a core question, doesn't it?
Yes, the one Kern wrestles with, prompted by his godfather. Is the goal of education simply to improve your social or economic position? Or is it to help you evaluate your true position and purpose in the world? A fundamental question. Finally, his review of Albert Memmi's Mémoires de Nomade covers a wide spectrum of personal and philosophical ideas,
He compares Memmi favorably to, La Fontaine. That's high praise.
suggesting he tackles essential human questions with a profound simplicity. He touches on many points from Memmi's book.
Like what? Give us a few.
Okay, seeing school as liberation, critiquing religious archaisms like circumcision, the idea that we're never truly finished with our relationship with our fathers.
Interesting.
The price of knowledge, especially regarding colonization and integration, the importance of fighting alone against powerful forces to overcome humiliation, seeing writing itself as a source of identity and a form of nomadism.
Like being mentally on the move?
Kind of, and viewing religion as that convenient fiction or indispensable crutch we mentioned, and criticizing ideological corporalism in politics,
What's corporalism again?
where political ideologies become rigid systems that treat people like bodies to be controlled, rather than individuals.
The Nostamera section offers some more personal glimpses. One really poignant piece is Oie est passé notre coaster? Where has our coaster gone? From 2007.
This isn't just about any bus. It's about the Polytechnic school bus. He reflects on its loss as a symbol of student pride and dignity.
It sounds really symbolic.
Very much so. He evokes fond memories associated with the bus and its driver, Monsieur Alima. The disappearance of this simple bus felt like a loss of something more significant.
A loss of hope connected to that symbol.
Exactly. Even though the memories of that time remain a source of strength for the pipo community, it's a very relatable feeling, I think, how seemingly small things can carry large symbolic weight for a community. And there's the anecdote about Loon Doror, a man on the university campus who claimed he worked at NASA.
Oh, no, the campus legend.
Right. He became an object of curiosity and sometimes playful teasing among the students.
A classic piece of campus folklore. The story's truth is less important than the fact that this figure captured the students' imagination.
Precisely.
He also includes a piece specifically addressing the pipo community. Polytechnician, solidaire. Polytechnician. Solitary. Solitary.
This piece is described as a cri de coeur, a cry from the heart, directed at his own community.
Suggesting a personal reflection on their identity.
Yes, their collective identity, their shared spirit, and perhaps the tension between feeling connected and feeling alone even within that group. So as you can hear, this deep dive covers an incredible range of topics, really from deeply personal memories and community bonds to global politics.
Abstract scientific concepts about the universe and life, and fundamental questions about what it means to think, work, and live in the modern world. It's a lot.
These aren't just random thoughts, though. They are the curated reflections and observations of one person, a pipo, grappling with the complex world around him, processing it through the diverse information available to him over many years.
Right. And our goal wasn't to give you definitive answers on all these huge topics.
No, not at all. It was really to provide a shortcut to these specific insights drawn directly from his writing. It's meant to open windows into different subjects, maybe challenge some assumptions you have.
And hopefully spark your own curiosity to connect these seemingly disparate ideas in your own mind. What really stands out to me looking across all these different reflections is this constant interplay, this tension.
You definitely see a clear tension between deeply rooted traditions, beliefs, and persistent challenges like poverty, conflict, and social inertia on one hand.
And on the other, the relentless forces of modernity. Scientific discovery, new technologies, evolving ideas about society, governance, and even reality itself.
And perhaps the most fascinating connection you could draw from all this is how, even amidst these vast, abstract global issues and scientific frontiers, there's a persistent thread of personal reflection.
The importance of community.
And the profound meaning found in simple observation, whether it's watching development projects, remembering a school bus, or encountering a campus legend.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. What connection can you draw between, say, the ancient philosophical struggle between tradition and knowledge we talked about, the modern scientific quest to understand the universe or genetics, and the challenges facing societies today?
Or even the questions you're grappling with in your own life? How do these big ideas and personal reflections connect for you?